Once more, give rise to bodhicitta and listen with bodhicitta. So we covered quite a bit of the text in the previous session. So we're currently looking at we're in the main body of the text, looking at the main section, which concerns the actual practice itself, and we're looking at the first subsection, the general preliminary practice for each session, which makes one a fit vessel. So the first subsection of part 2, the main explanation of the stages for setting out on the path. From among these two subsections, we're looking at the first. So actually we've covered the first. She read very quickly through the last paragraphs of this text before the break. So now we're moving straight on to the next subsection, the specific preliminary practice for the yogas of the two phases, which is comprised again of two further subsections, the first of which is the common preliminaries that cultivate the field of one's mind stream with the four practices for turning the mind. So the first of these is the reflection of the common preliminaries of the four mind changings. Why do we say common preliminaries? Because they are common or shared. We talk about the common preliminaries and uncommon preliminaries. We need to know what is meant by common and uncommon here. So common means common to or shared by all of the various vehicles of Buddha Dharma, from the vehicle of Shravakas, listeners, on up. Without this reflection of the four mind changings, it is not possible. It's not possible to properly practice the path. If we look at the words of my perfect teacher, 60% of that commentary, that preliminary practice commentary, is spent on discussing the four mind changings, taking to heart the four mind changings. Why is that? Why is the majority of that precious text spent on a discussion of the four mind changings? Well, because the four mind changings are so important. Whether you're practicing the foundational vehicle, the greater vehicle, whatever aspect of the Vajrayana, all the way up to the great perfection, the summit of all vehicles, the four mind changings, cultivating the four mind changings, are indispensable. They are so incredibly important. That is why Padraig Rinpoche spends the majority of his text, the words of my perfect teacher, talking about the four mind changings. That's just one illustration of the importance of the four mind changings. If we can look at the Kadam tradition of Laura Swan and so on, which is divided further into the old and new Kadam tradition. So the old Kadam begins with Lord Atisha and his disciples. The new Kadam begins with just after Gyaltse Tongbe. In the Kadam tradition, old and new both, they focus primarily on cultivating the four mind changings, taking the four mind changings to heart. The four mind changings of precious human body, death and impermanence, karmic cause and effect, and the shortcomings of samsara. Without taking these to heart and thereby transforming one's mind, turning one's mind away from samsara and taking them to heart, it's not possible to become a genuine practitioner, to genuinely progress. There's simply no way to become a genuine good practitioner without taking these four mind changings to heart. So therefore we have the reflection on the common preliminaries, common to all vehicles, as I've said, from the foundational vehicle all the way up to the Vajrayana. These are vital, crucial preliminaries for all practice of Buddha Dharma. And for among the four mind changings, we begin with reflecting on the difficulty of finding the freedoms and advantages. And they're explained here, as we'll see, so clearly, precisely, accessibly, It's such a perfect composition by Kyabje Gyujo Rinpoche. As I've said before, in a sense, there's really no need to add any explanation. The words speak for themselves. Kyabje Gyujo Rinpoche, his great scholarship and learning is reflected even in his the structural outline of his texts. The way he structures his texts, that itself reflects his great scholarship. So here we have again further fourfold subdivision. And we begin with the first of this fourfold subdivision, namely the reflection on the difficulty of finding the freedoms and advantages, namely the precious human body endowed with the freedoms and advantages. So this will be explained by means of 4 sections or 4 points, identifying the freedoms and advantages, the reason they're so difficult to obtain, and so on. We're on page 59 now. So we begin with the first, identifying the freedoms and advantages, and to this end, identifying the 8 states of lack of opportunity. When we talk about the 8 freedoms, what are we talking about? We're talking about being free from 8 states of lack of opportunity. And Rinpoche was praising Kyabje Gyujo Rinpoche's composition. It's not only so crystal clear and precise in meaning, but so beautiful to read. I think this comes through in the translation as well. So the 8 states of lack of opportunity include being a hell being, being born as a hell being, a hungry spirit, an animal, barbarian, long-lived god, and so on. So when we talk about a precious human birth, we're not talking just about any human birth, right, but a specific kind of human birth. So a lot of us might think, a lot of you might think, might look kind of with admiration to people living over in developed countries like the US and think, oh, people there must be so happy. We presume they're happy. But honestly, the reality is, it's not like that. Reality is not like that at all. Yeah, the material circumstances might be a bit better. At least, might look that way. But people there are so constantly busy, constantly striving, and in any case, not fulfilled. So, back to the 8 states of lack of opportunity. To be reborn as a hell being, a hungry spirit, an animal, a barbarian, a long-lived god, to have wrong views, the wrong views of some non-Buddhists who believe things like believe that blood sacrifice is virtuous, who believe that waging war is a spiritual practice. They mistake non-virtue for virtue, and set out on a perverted path. So this is what... Oh, sorry, this was actually about barbarians. Barbarians and wrong view both. Wrong view also refers to those who do not believe in the veracity and worth of the 3 jewels. They don't believe in past and future lives. They don't believe in karmic cause and effect, like some communists who believe there's no life after death, there's no causality. They refute religion. And in Nepal we've had a lot of issues with the Maoist party and so on, and all of their politics. Even the Congress, so in contrast to the Communist, the Maoist party here in Nepal, even those, the Congress party, they don't refute religion as the Maoists do. However, their allegiance is to democracy, right, and tolerance and respect. So they tolerate those who are religious, those who are not religious. They respect democracy and the voice of the people, and so on. But anyway, the point is we're talking about wrong view here, one of the 8 states of lack of opportunity. And communists, those with the communist view, like Karl Marx, who refute religion, who believe there is no life after death, no past and future lives. This is a case of people who have a wrong view. Then you might just have people who don't have such well thought out views, but they don't believe in the Dhamma. They don't believe in religion, we could say. They don't believe in the spiritual. That's also a wrong view. Maybe a lot of young modern people are like that these days. Then we have the absence of a Buddha, and then it being dumb. So when we say dumb, that word itself refers to people who are mute and deaf and so on. But what we mean here by dumb is people who are mentally disabled or mentally inept. They are unable to understand things. They're not able to. They're not able to learn and understand things. So these days there are many people who are mute or deaf. They cannot speak or hear, but by means of Braille and so on, they're able to study, and they're actually very bright mentally and have reached have become very well educated and are very capable mentally, even though they're unable to speak or hear. But so when we say dumb here, as Patrul Rinpoche clarifies in his Words of My Perfect Teacher, we should understand we're talking about people whose mental faculty is impaired. So we can backtrack to the previous state of lack of opportunity, the absence of a Buddha. So here in our world, the Buddha has appeared, right? Buddha has graced our land with his presence. In this part of the world, at least, Buddha appeared, and his teachings and influence has spread all through Asia and so on, right? She mentioned many countries, Burma and so on. And spread beyond Asia to other continents as well, right? But there are other worlds, other universes, where a Buddha does not appear, where a Buddha never appears, so the people living in that world, they never get to hear about Buddha, never get to encounter Buddha, encounter his teachings. So such eons or periods of time where the Buddha does not appear are called dark eons, dark kalpas. So these points, all the scholars here will be very familiar with these points and how they're defined and so on. But basically, the absence of a Buddha refers to being born in a kalpa or a period of time where Buddha has not appeared, or a place where the Buddha's influence has not spread, a place where there's no exposure to Buddha and his teachings. So that is one of the 8 states of lack of opportunity. So I think Rinpoche was saying Buddha has appeared in this world, but there are still corners of this world where perhaps the Buddha's influence has just not spread at all, where people in those countries would just never hear of Buddha, never see or hear of Buddha and his teachings. So that would be to be born in the absence of a Buddha. So to be born as a hell, a hungry spirit, an animal, a barbarian, a long-lived god, to have wrong views, the absence of Buddha, and be dumb. These are the 8 states that lack opportunity. So we are free of these 8 unfree states, right? We have been born neither as a hell being, a hungry spirit, an animal, a barbarian, a long-lived god. Thanks to the kindness of our parents and our Tibetan ancestry, heritage, we are free of wrong view. We have been born in an eon where Buddha did appear and is present, and we are also not dumb. We are mentally able. So we are free from these 8 unfree states. So in this sense we have freedom. We have a degree of freedom. But so in this sense we can say, okay, we're free of these 8 states of lack of opportunity, so therefore we are free, we're endowed with freedom. But then we actually need to examine a little more deeper and ask ourselves if that is really true. If we are free of being a hell being and so on, and we've attained a human birth, but if we then busy ourselves with business, with worldly occupations, and we're completely preoccupied night and day with such things, can we really say that we're free to practice the Dharma? Whether we be a layperson or even a practitioner, if we're completely occupied night and day with other concerns, with mundane concerns, then we're not really free. We're not really free, despite what it might look like. Because when we say free here, we're talking about free to practice the Dharma. And if we busy ourselves constantly with mundane preoccupations, we're not going to have the freedom, the time, the opportunity to engage in the Dharma. So we cannot say that we're really free. So whether you're busying yourself with business, with farming, with agriculture, or even if you're a lama, a renunciate, a monastic, if you're busying yourself with other things, then it's difficult to say that you are genuinely free to practice the Dharma. So, jumping up, it says, the precious human body is the indispensable support for accomplishing enlightenment, and it has to have the following perfect features: the essence of the support, namely freedom, which is the opposite of the 8 states of lack of opportunity. Essence here means definition, the defining characteristics of something. So in the philosophical scriptures, when we say, when this word essence is used, it's referring to the defining characteristics of something, the real identity or definition of something. So the kind of defining characteristics of a precious human body is freedom, the kind of freedom that we've just described. As the omniscient Longchenpa explains in his treasuries, when we talk about a human birth, we can talk about a mere human birth, a special human birth, and a precious human birth. So a mere human birth is to just be born with a human body, but to be just to live a completely mundane life. A special human body is to be born as a human and to have a connection with the Buddha Dharma, to engage in the Dharma a little bit here and there on the side. So to engage in the Dharma on the side is to have a special human body. So you're better than an ordinary human person. You have a special human body. And then those who have a precious human body, Longchenpa explains, are those who devote themselves heart and soul, we could say, to the Dhamma. Only those people can really be said to have a precious human body. This is what Longchenpa explains in his treasuries. I think Rinpoche said the wish fulfilling treasury. So the precious human body also needs to be endowed with its particular features, namely the 5 individual advantages, which are like ornaments, and the 5 circumstantial advantages, which, as it were, illuminate and enhance those ornaments. So the 5 intrinsic or personal advantages, meaning one's body needs to be healthy, complete. Or to go through them one by one, one needs to be born as a human in a central land with all one's faculties complete. without a conflicting lifestyle and with faith in the Dharma. From among the 10 advantages, these are the 5 individual or intrinsic advantages. When we say, so to be born a human with a human body, secondly, to be born in central land. Central land can be defined in 2 ways, geographically and in terms of the presence of Dharma, or geographically and essentially. So geographically, the geographic central land refers to a specific part of ancient India, the areas in which Buddha actually appeared and travelled and lived. So from that sense, even the snowy land of Tibet does not qualify as a central land, a geographical central land, because Buddha did not go to Tibet, right? But in terms of meaning, essential meaning, the snowy land of Tibet is certainly a central land, thanks to the kindness of Guru Rinpoche, the great master Guru Rinpoche, the Khenpo Bodhisattva Shantarakshita, and the Dharma King Trisam Detsen. Thanks to their combined kindness, the Buddhist teachings were established in Tibet and spread and flourished. The sun of the Buddha's teachings shone even more brightly, even further and wider than it did in the noble land of India. We can honestly say that, and that was due to the kindness of Guru Rinpoche, Khenpo Bodhisattva, and King Trisam Detsen. Even though Buddha Shakyamuni did not grace Tibet with his presence, thanks to Guru Rinpoche and so on, the Buddha Dharma, Buddha Shakyamuni's teachings were established there in an unequaled way. So it's vital that we acknowledge the kindness of Guru Rinpoche in establishing the Buddha Dharma in Tibet. So in terms of when we speak of a central land, again we have 2 types of central land: geographical central land, and then we could say essential central land. So central central land is any place where the Buddha's teachings are practiced and are accessible. So to be born with all one's faculties complete, one's sense faculties, one's eyes, ears, and so on. To be free of a conflicting lifestyle, and this essentially means to be born to Buddhist parents, to be born into a Buddhist tradition, Buddhist family, because that will, in that way, one is freed from a conflicting lifestyle. One is born into and raised in the Buddhist tradition, and to have faith in the Dharma. So, running quickly through these 5 individual advantages, these, if we go back to page 59, Ajahn Rinpoche explains, are like ornaments. So, for instance, if you have a beautiful young woman, she has a beautiful figure, a fine figure, and then she's adorned with beautiful jewelry, made from star sapphires and other precious gems. Those jewels just further enhance her beauty, right? So in this way, the 5 individual advantages are like ornaments. So the essence of the support is the 8 freedoms, and then its particular features are like ornaments. Sorry, the 5 individual advantages are like ornaments. So the 8 freedoms are like the body, like a physical body, and the advantages are like ornaments, beautifying that body. So the second set of 5 advantages are the 5 circumstantial advantages, or we could say 5 extrinsic advantages. These are: a Buddha has come, he taught the Dharma, his doctrine has endured, it has a following, and they are kind-hearted and altruistic. So Buddha has come. In our case, Buddha Shakyamuni appeared in this excellent eon. He appeared, manifested enlightenment, and taught the wheel of Dharma. So that's the second circumstantial advantage, that he taught the Dharma. He turned the wheel of Dharma in places like Varanasi and so on. He turned the 3 turnings of the Dharma wheel. His doctrine has endured. In the scriptures we find various presentations, explanations of how long the teachings will remain for 2,000, 3,000 years and so on. In Longchenpa's text, he explains clearly that the teachings will remain for a total of 5,000 years in this world. First of all, for 1,500 years, the teachings will there'll be a period of realization for 1500 years, a period of scripture, 1500 years, a period of teaching, I think, and for 500 years, a period where the teachings remain just in the form of, in a superficial way. That wasn't the best translation of the names of those 4 periods, but Longchenpa explains how long the teachings will remain in this world in a specific way in his teachings, and it comes to a total of 500 years. So his doctrine has endured, and indeed his doctrine has endured or it remains, and that is certainly the case now. The teachings of the Buddha still remain in this world, and it has a following. They are followed. This essentially means that there are followers of the Buddha, those with the monastic vows. There is a Sangha. But in the wider sense, in addition to the monastic Sangha, there are Buddhist followers. There are those who have entered the teachings by taking refuge with the hair-cutting ceremony and who are following the Buddhist path. Furthermore, they are kind-hearted and altruistic. Those who follow the Buddhist teachings are kind-hearted and altruistic, have the kindness of embracing others and sharing the teachings with them. So when we look around this assembly at everyone here, if we think about it kind of roughly and loosely, then we can say pretty confidently that all of us here have the 8 freedoms and the 10 advantages. We all are endowed with the precious human body, endowed with these 8 freedoms and 10 advantages. But if we look at our situation in more detail, then some of these points, will come into question, whether we're really endowed with them through and through. But again, the freedoms, Kyabji Rinpoche is explaining the essence of the support, so that to be endowed with the 8 freedoms is to have a body, an excellent physical body that is beautiful and handsome. The 10 advantages, comprised of the 5 individual and 5 circumstantial advantages, are like ornaments. So as it says on page 59, the 5 individual advantages are like ornaments, and the 5 circumstantial advantages illuminate and enhance those ornaments. So we can say like a beautiful woman who is beautiful in and of herself, who is then adorned with beautiful jewelry, and so on, which further enhances her natural beauty. The 18 freedoms and advantages are like that. So, in terms of the text, we're just on page 59, but I've actually pretty much described the 8 freedoms and 10 advantages already, so now I'm going to move quite quickly through the next few pages of text. So, those who are born in the 3 lower realms suffer too intensely and have too poor a physical port to have the opportunity to practice the Dharma. Their suffering is too intense, too overwhelming. The situation is just too appalling. Their suffering too intense. Therefore, they don't have the chance to practice the Dharma. They're just consumed by their suffering. They have no time or opportunity for anything else. That's what it's like if you're born in the lower realms of hell and so on. The gods in the world of desire are distracted by their attachment to the pleasures of the senses and have little disillusionment, just little disenchantment with the sense pleasures, while the gods in the higher worlds of form and formless realms are mostly perpetually high on concentration. So if one is so absorbed in the sense pleasures, attached to the sense pleasures, as the long life gods and so on are, it's not possible to engage in the Dharma. One engages in the Dharma by becoming disenchanted with the sense pleasures, becoming disenchanted with the sense pleasures, renouncing the sense pleasures and mundane pleasures, just as Buddha did. Of course, Buddha was simply displaying this disenchantment and renunciation in order to guide others on the path. But that is how the spiritual path is entered into and how it is accomplished, with renunciation and disenchantment. Not by remaining completely ensnared by the sense pleasures and high on the bliss of concentration and so on. So the gods in the higher realms of form and formlessness are perpetually high on concentration. In those states of concentration or meditative absorption, they are free of coarser types of suffering, but eventually those states of concentration come to an end. Their karma exhausts, they fall out of meditative concentration, and then they undergo the intense suffering of falling from the higher god realms to the lower realms. And that is overwhelming suffering that the gods go through at that point. Then there are those who are born in the worlds devoid of a Buddha, in places, that is, in places to which no Buddha has come. So this also refers to those who are born in places to which no Buddha has come. Those who, even though born in a world to which a Buddha has come, are barbarians in border regions where the Buddha has not spread. So this refers to various corners of our world in which Buddha has appeared, which the Dharma has spread, but it hasn't spread to all corners. There are still places which are completely dark, in the sense that the Buddha Dharma is completely absent. People living there will never hear Buddha's name, will never encounter his teachings. You can think even of places like Afghanistan, present-day Afghanistan and so on, where many centuries ago the Buddha Dharma flourished. But now the Buddha Dharma is no longer present there. Extremists like the Taliban have taken over. The Buddha Dharma is completely absent. Such people living in those corners of the world will never have little to no chance of encountering the Buddha and his teachings. So we can say this is who barbarians refers to, people who have fallen onto perverted paths, to wrong views, and whose lives are void of the Buddha and his teachings. People like, she mentioned the Taliban, and now we're talking about those with wrong views, so people like Lenin and Karl Marx, who deny the spiritual, deny past and future lives and so on. That is wrong view. Those who are born completely dumb. As we mentioned, as I explained just before, this refers to those who are mentally inept and who are not intelligent enough to be able to undertake what is right and reject what is wrong. So these then are the 8 states of lack of opportunity. Of them, the 3 lower realms and long-lived gods are non-human states. So when it says non-human here, we're not referring to the type of being, which is called a non-human. There are some types of beings, spirits we could say, who are called non-humans. But that's not what we're talking about here. This just means that these are states that are, these are not human states. They are types of other beings, being born in the 3 lower realms and as a long-lived god. Whereas the other 4 unfree states are human states, but human states in which there's no opportunity to practice the Dharma. So if we are born in any of these 8 free states, it's not possible to genuinely accomplish the Dharma. Even if we're endowed with the 8 freedoms, it is still very challenging to actually practice the Dharma, to find someone who is genuinely, authentically practicing the Dharma. It's very rare, very difficult in this world. Those who authentically practice the Dharma are incredibly rare, as the scriptures explain. The Bodhisattva Akashagarbha asked, Bhagavan, how should one view the freedoms and advantages? Buddha answered. So there was a Q&A, we could say, between the Bodhisattva and the Buddha. In English, there's a formatting convention for questions and answers, right? You put the question up on one line with a question mark at the end and then the answer below. It's immediately clear. What is the question? What's the answer? We don't have that same formatting convention in Tibetan. Some of the formatting conventions of English language texts are really excellent. Anyway, Buddha answered, when mind is buffered by thoughts inspired by the afflictions of attachment, aversion, and so on, attachment to wealth, to status, to name, to sense pleasures, and so on, and thus distracted. When we are attached to such things, that attachment distracts the mind, disturbs the mind, so the mind becomes busy and agitated, stirred up, and this is having no leisure. Just as Shantideva teaches in the way of Bodhisattva, know that it is through vipassana, fully endowed with shamatha, that the afflictions are overcome. So it is through vipassana, deep insight, endowed with shamatha, calm abiding, that the turmoil of the afflictions is overcome, so that this state of no leisure is overcome. When the thoughts in the mind are stilled and is at ease, this is freedom. When we talk about the afflictions, we can condense them all into the three poisons of attachment, aversion, and ignorance, but we can also go into them in more detail, as the scriptures of Abhidharma and do so on, and identify dozens of different afflictions, different types of attachment, of aversion, of ignorance, pride, jealousy, and so on. Rinpoche listed several enumerations. But all of these different states of mind and afflictions that are mentioned in the scriptures, in the Abhidharma and so on, they are all thoughts. They are all thoughts, or we can say they are all conceptual states. Whatever practice we're doing, if we have the opportunity to practice and we take that opportunity to practice, whether it be then we can say, if we have the opportunity to practice and we take up that opportunity, going off to focus on, say, accumulating the Mani mantra, the Vajraguru mantra, to engage in the preliminaries or whatever practice it might be, then we can genuinely say that we have freedom to practice. But if we don't make the time to practice, if we don't give ourselves the freedom and time to practice, then we can't really say that we are free, even if we can tick off each of these 8 points here. So from among these 8 freedoms, the first 4 being reborn as a hell being, a hungry ghost, an animal, and a long-lived God, we don't have the kind of independence or volition to just avoid these states. At present, we've avoided them and taken rebirth as a human due to past positive karma. But in this life, then we could encounter the other states, unfree states of wrong view, being dumb and so on. And these could be remedied if we encounter a genuine spiritual friend. When it comes to the Dhamma, upholding and propagating the Dhamma, So this, I guess, is directed specifically to those involved in monastery management and so on. We need to have our priorities straight. When it comes to upholding and preserving the Dharma, the most important thing, the priority must always be, is and must always be, teaching the Dharma, educating the students. For instance, if you have a monastery, the most important thing is to educate the monastics in the monastery, to give them teachings, to instruct them correctly, to educate them. The external resources and facilities should always be the second priority, a lesser priority. If one as a Lama prioritizes fundraising and so on, so that covering the food bills and being able to build facilities at the monastery, and to that end neglects the monastic's education and doesn't give one time to teach and study, then one is completely mistaken. One's priorities are completely upside down. So we always need to have our priorities straight. The path of Dharma is different from the path of the mundane world. So the priorities of a Dharma practitioner, the priorities of Dharma are different from mundane priorities. And I mention this for those who are involved in monastery management or in those roles. It's really vital that you have your priorities straight. For instance, instead of going off and applying yourself to practice, instead of going off and doing a retreat yourself, instead you distract yourself with fundraising. Oh, I'm traveling around here and there to the West raising money. Why? So that I can build a retreat center for others. Well, I'm sorry, you've got it wrong. You should first of all focus on practicing yourself. You haven't stayed on retreat yourself, but you're busying yourself with fundraising for a retreat center. First of all, stay on retreat yourself, develop yourself, and then everything else will come together naturally. Otherwise, if your priorities are all upside down, you focus on fundraising and building temples and so on, you can end up, as we see actually in many places now, with a big temple and lots of rooms, but no monks in the temple, no practitioners in the temple. And what is the point in that? So, I feel it's very important to emphasize these points. We all need to be clear on our priorities. After all, of you have come here to receive the Dharma, right? To receive the Dharma from me, to gain some clarity about the Dharma. So in that light, it's important. I feel it's important and valuable to mention these points. Mention these points for those of the monks and so on up here who are involved in monastery management and the like, but also for the lay practitioners and lay students. You also need to have your priorities correct, right? To prioritize your own practice over your mundane activities and preoccupations. Think about the Himalayan areas that most of us here are from. Rinpoche mentioned many places, and all the great masters, accomplished masters, the sublime beings who have lived in and visited those places, blessed those places over the course of the centuries, and who have left their legacies, so to speak, in those places, their legacy of practice and the light of the Dharma, who've shone the light of Dharma in those places and inspired others to become genuine practitioners and to uphold the Dharma in those places. So that's all the presence of the Dharma up in these various Himalayan regions. And again, Rinpoche mentioned many names of places and masters. That's all due to the kindness of those great masters. So we need to maintain that and keep the light of the Dharma burning, so to speak. So back to the 8 unfree states. Sorry, actually, the 5 individual advantages, one of them is to be without a conflicting lifestyle. So without a conflicting lifestyle, like being born as a butcher, or born into a livelihood that is by nature negative and in discord with the Dharma. And like I said, this also refers to being born into a Buddhist family, because when you're born into a Buddhist family, into a Buddhist tradition, then you have that positive conditioning from young. You have that positive influence as you grow up. For instance, those of us who are raised by Buddhist parents, think of the positive influence they had on us, right? I can think of my own parents' influence, especially my mother's, and how she was always encouraging us in the Dharma at a young age, making us get up when we wanted to sleep in and so on. But that said, these days in Nepal, we see the opposite thing happening. It's probably a result of karma from past lives. A lot of people these days in Nepal, their parents aren't Buddhist, their parents aren't practitioners, but their children, the younger generation, are naturally becoming interested in the Dharma and really devoted to the Dharma. We see the same thing in Western countries. People are born to non-Buddhist parents, but it must be through the power of their karma from past lives. They gain an interest in the Dharma. Somehow they encounter the Dharma and they have so much faith, and then they pursue the Dharma. So that can happen too. Anyway, so we have without a conflicting lifestyle, that advantage, and then to have faith in the Dharma. So these are the 5 individual advantages altogether. To be free of the 8 states of no opportunity and to have the 5 individual advantages is crucially important. Then we come to the 5 circumstantial advantages, which I've already explained. These words here, these lines of verse, a Buddha has come, he taught the Dharma and so on, these come from Nagarjuna's text, from his letter to a friend and so on. Even though the coming of a Buddha in the world is even rarer than the flower of the Udambara is an incredibly rare flower. It's said to only bloom once every 100 years or even less. So, to be born at a time and a place where Buddha has appeared, that is the most important, valuable thing. Otherwise, to be born in a really high status, or really rich, or really powerful, that does not matter one single bit. What is important is to be born in a place where Buddha has come, where Buddha's teachings are present. So sometimes you might kind of be in awe of people who are very powerful and rich, or president of this and that country and so on and so forth. But if you think about it, there is nothing impressive about that whatsoever. Nothing impressive about being rich, nothing impressive about being powerful. Look at the way those people end up anyway. Most rich people are miserable. A lot of powerful people end up becoming corrupt and then being caught out and put in jail, and then they wither away in jail. In any case, when they die, no matter how rich or powerful you are, when you die you have to leave it all away, right? You die alone, your body rots, it's eaten by bugs, and all your wealth is just left behind. So there's nothing impressive about being rich or powerful and all of that. What is important is to be born in a place where Buddha has come, where he taught the Dharma. To encounter the Buddha and his teachings, that is what matters. So you also need to be born in a place where Buddha's teachings have not disappeared but still endure, where there are individuals who follow and practice those teachings, and moreover, where there are people who compassionately guide other beings, where there are people who are capable of being spiritual friends, who are capable of being teachers and guiding us. And moreover, that we need to be embraced by such people, embraced like I was by my gracious root gurus such as Khenpo Daza Rinpoche. He was a perfect teacher, and he had the kindness and compassion to take me in as a student and to guide me. Advantage is to know the nature of the mind, one's mind being thus endowed with the authentic truth. To know the nature of mind, well, this is something quite complex. There are many ways to knowing, or aspects to knowing the nature of the mind. The way the nature of mind is known at the level of sutra teachings, the level of Madhyamaka, the level of the 3 outer tantras, the 3 inner tantras, and so on. So we could explain knowing the nature of mind, what that means in different ways according to the 9 vehicles, the 9 yanas of Buddha's teachings. So Rinpoche quoted some lines of scripture that explain one way of knowing the nature of mind, meaning knowing the nature of mind to be bodhicitta. But as I've said, there are kind of many layers or aspects to knowing the nature of mind, depending on which level of teaching we're speaking of. A human body like this, complete with the 18 freedoms and advantages, is difficult to find. Now we're on page 62. To obtain it is even more amazing than a blind pauper finding the greatest of precious gems. So a blind person who is also a beggar. Think someone who is a beggar who's also blind, and in the middle of thousands of people, he suddenly manages to lay his hands on a priceless jewel. It's almost impossible, right, for that to happen. But to obtain the precious human body endowed with the 18 freedoms and advantages is something even more amazing and extraordinary than that, because thereby we have the opportunity to practice the Dharma. But as I've said, to obtain a precious human body endowed with the freedoms and advantages and not use it to practice the Dharma, to not apply ourselves to practice the Dharma, well then we can't say there's anything amazing or special about having a precious human body. If we don't put it to use, then if we don't put it to use, we can't say there's anything special about it. As in the words of my perfect teacher, it said, that which is difficult having obtained that which is difficult to obtain, the precious Dharma, having found that which is difficult to find, the precious human body. So this is an extraordinary situation we find ourselves in, attaining the precious human body endowed with these 18 freedoms and advantages, encountering the Buddha Dharma, the priceless Buddha Dharma. For this reason, you should be immensely joyful and make every effort to practice the sublime Dharma. And we have a quotation from the sutras, and then the words of the great omniscient one, Longchenpa himself: friends, to find the gem-like essence, the body with the freedoms and advantages. From among the 6 classes of beings, it's extremely hard, like a blind man finding a treasure of jewels, rejoice and accomplish benefit and happiness. So I won't explain each of these quotations line by line. We could also quote from The Way of a Bodhisattva by Bodhisattva Shantideva. We won't go through all these quotations word by word. It will take time that we simply don't have. So now we move on to the next subsection, the way in which the freedoms and advantages are so difficult to obtain. There are three parts to this: the difficulty of finding the freedoms and advantages in terms of their cause, in terms of assimony, and in terms of number. This is presented in the same way as in Patrul Rinpoche's The Words of My Perfect Teacher. This is such a precious text. And sadly, this precious text, this commentary by Kyabje Dushu Rinpoche, is not taught very often these days, as I mentioned the other day. That said, maybe it is taught more than I think, more than I imagine. The majority of Kyabje Dushu Rinpoche's disciples, it seems, are in eastern Bhutan, or a great number of them are. So maybe it is being taught and studied more there. But if it's not, if we neglect these precious teachings that are like the precious gems and jewels of our Dudjom Tessa tradition, then it's really very, very poor, very sad and poor situation to not uphold and look after the jewels of our own tradition, jewels like this precious text. We uphold these precious jewels of Dharma by studying them and by teaching them, right? So in the past, one time we were at the Shiri Singha Shedra, Dzogchen Shedra, in Tibet, in East Tibet. I think Rinpoche is saying Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche visited. This was probably back in the 80s or 90s. And Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche said in his handsome voice, the teachings of Shakyamuni are upheld by means of scripture and realization, meaning by study and practice. So we uphold the Dharma, preserve the Dharma, not by building and so on, but actually by studying and practice. You might think, when I'm up here saying these things, and you might think, how can Rinpoche say these things? Isn't it hypocritical? He himself is busy building. He himself builds monasteries and temples and so on. I just had the inauguration of a new temple at my nunnery, and have about 500 monks and nuns. So, yeah, we do build monasteries, temples, these infrastructures that serve as places for the study and practice of the teachings. That's important to some extent, but it is not the main thing. This needs to be really clear for us. Building and just developing temples and physical structures is not the main thing. It's beneficial, yes, but it's not the main thing. The main thing is study and practice. So a story to this end. In the past, I was in Taiwan at one point, and there was an older lady there who was a disciple of mine, who I'd known for many years. And one day she said to me, she came to see me, and she said, Rinpoche, you can't. She said, you can't go on as you are, going on 3-year retreat and going on retreat for long periods of time, just focusing on teaching the monks, and not traveling overseas, not raising funds for your monastery. How do you think you're going to keep feeding your monks? She indeed had helped me a lot to raise funds and donations for my monks and nuns. And she said, our currency is becoming weaker. Now people aren't as, I think she was saying, people aren't as wealthy as they used to be. If you don't spend more time overseas helping us raise funds for your monastery, we're not going to be able to raise enough. And she was saying, basically, I need to spend less time at my monastery, less time on retreat, and more time overseas in places like Taiwan. So usually I'd go to Taiwan just once every 2 or 3 years, and I stay just 1 or 2 months. I focus the majority of my time on my own practice in retreat and also studying the teachings and teaching them to the monks. And in response to her concern, I explained things really clearly. I said, you need to know my priorities. The most important thing to me is my own study and practice and educating my monks and students. The lowest on my priority is, developing the monastery and all of that. So if I can do things like develop the monastery, build temples, build supports of body, speech and mind without disturbing my study and practice, without compromising the education of my students, then I will do it. I will happily do it. But if it interferes with my own study and practice, then I'm happy, I'm very willing and ready to let those activities go, because they are not the priority. They are not the most important thing. And after I explained it to her, then then everything became clear between us, and she accepted and respected what I said. So this is how our priorities as practitioners should be, like that, right? So your first priority, your second priority, and so on. So this is how it should be for practitioners, for lamas and so on. But likewise for the lay practitioners, who can't devote all their time to study and practice. But still, you need to prioritize your practice. As Patrul Rinpoche said, if you can spend 10% of your life, if you can devote 10% of your life, your time and energy to the Dhamma, you are guaranteed to be freed from the lower realms, whoever you are. If you just devote 10% of your time and energy to the Dhamma, you will not be born in the lower realms, guaranteed. This is what Patrul Rinpoche said, and this is possible for all of us, right? Once a year, so out of the 12 months of each year, if you can devote 1 month to retreat, 1 month to the Dhamma, that is doable, right? That is doable. So please take this to heart and prioritize the Dhamma in your life. Otherwise, just running after money and trying to money, financial security, and so on, and busying yourself with that, and letting your whole life slip by. Well, there's just no use in that. We all need to prioritize Dhamma. So, and again, as I'm saying this, if I don't explain my personal situation, then you might think, well, what does Rinpoche mean by saying this? He's saying we need to prioritize study and practice, but he himself is involved in building temples and so on. As probably a lot of you know, I just built a new temple up for my nuns and so on and so forth. But as I've said, I have my priorities clearly set. If I can do such things like building temples without disturbing my own study and practice at all, then I do them. But if they disturb or compromise my study and practice, then I let them go. So it's like that. We need to prioritize like that. So now we're reflecting on the difficulty of finding the freedoms and advantages in terms of their cause. The main cause of such a precious human body with the freedoms and advantages is discipline, pure discipline. And it is very rare to find someone with pure discipline, isn't it? When we say pure discipline, we're not just talking about observing the monastic vows, but if you're a lay practitioner, purely correctly observing and upholding the 5 lay precepts. So, to not steal, to not kill, to not tell unsurpassable lies, and instead of celibacy, which would be the case if you're a monastic, to not engage in sexual misconduct, and to avoid intoxicants or avoid becoming intoxicated. So these are the 4 or 5 root vows for lay practitioners, the basic fundamental discipline that we need to observe as Buddhist followers. These are explained in the treatise on the 3 vows by Lodchen Dhamashiri and so on, by Ngare Pandita with Lodchen Dhamashiri's commentary and so on, and other texts. You can read about them in more detail. So if you're a monastic, then you will be holding more kind of further levels of vows and precepts. But as a lay practitioner, at the least we must uphold the 5 precepts. The 5 precepts comprised of the 4 root vows and the 5th precept. If we fail to observe this basic discipline of the 5 precepts, then it will be very challenging for us, very difficult for us to obtain a precious human body again in our next life. So, for instance, if you chant the Mani Mantra, practice the Mani Mantra, practice Avalokiteshvara, and also specifically practice the fasting ritual of Avalokiteshvara, which in Tibetan we call Nyungne, then Avalokiteshvara himself declared that anyone who performs, I think Rinpoche said, 1 set of fasting or several sets of fasting, will without doubt take rebirth in the Bodha Pure Land, the Pure Land of Avalokiteshvara in the future after death. So, and inspired by this, many people these days practice the fasting ritual. One is guaranteed positive rebirth by practicing that fasting ritual of Avalokiteshvara. So that's one way to practice discipline. And on top of that, there are renunciates, monastics, who take the novice or full vows of a monk or nun, and that is very excellent, incredibly excellent. Incredibly excellent and beneficial, but again, one shouldn't be too I think Rinpoche said one shouldn't be too proud about those vows, but it is important to uphold them purely. Essentially, it's the monastic sangha, the monastics, renunciants who hold the novice and full vows, who uphold the Buddha's teachings. As it said, it's the monastic sangha that are the foundation of Buddha's teachings. The monastic sangha is indispensable for upholding and preserving and maintaining the Buddha's teachings. So those of you here who are parents, it's really wonderful, beneficial for oneself, for the sake of the teachings and the Dharma and all beings, if your children become monks and nuns. These days, a lot of people, a lot of wealthier families, instead of focusing on kind of directing their children into the Dharma, onto the path of the Dharma, instead they busy themselves trying to send their children overseas to Canada and America and give them a Western education in this. It's completely mistaken ambition. There is so much value, incredible value and benefit for everyone if your children can be ordained and enter the monastic sangha. So I'm not saying send them necessarily to my monastery, whichever monastery, of whichever tradition, Geluk, Sakya, Nyingma. And especially those children of wealthier families, those of you who are wealthier or more accomplished or more educated or what have you, to have your children ordained, your children enter the monastery. Even more beneficial. These days, a lot of Tibetans, actually, people in Tibet itself, there are very few who are sending their children to be ordained to become monks or nuns. And this is such a shame, actually. This is actually quite embarrassing, quite shameful. Tibetans who are of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition instead of focusing on the precious Buddha Dharma, and like raising their children in that tradition, instead they're always trying to send their children out to the West, giving them a Western education and so on. This is totally wrong. These days it's more those in the Himalayan border regions and also those in other Nepalese ethnicities who are becoming monks and nuns and filling the monasteries, which is wonderful, but it's equally a shame and actually embarrassing that the Tibetans, proper Tibetans so to speak, are not sending their children along the same path. This is our heritage, our precious ancestry. Rinpoche said previously that you might worry, what if I have my child, what if my child goes to the monastery, becomes a monk or nun, but then when they grow up they leave, and out of fear of that you don't send your child to the monastery. You think, because it would be terrible if they disrobed, better not to send them in the first place. But actually that's not the case. Even if your child disrobes, it doesn't matter. They've gained a Dharma education, and that positive conditioning, they've learned how to practice, they study the scriptures. That makes their life meaningful and also allows them, equips them to benefit others, benefit society and so on. So even if they disrobe, there's enormous benefit to someone being raised in the monastery and gaining that education. So that was a bit of a tangent, but an important point nevertheless. So on page 63 it says, rarer still are those who have observed sufficient discipline to act as the propelling cause for a faultless human body. So it's discipline is the cause for taking rebirth in a human body. This is why it's so difficult to find a human body, as Chandrakirti says in his introduction to the Middle Way, and high rebirth, meaning rebirth as a human and God, derives from discipline alone. Since its discipline is the main cause for rebirth in the human realm, this is why I was emphasizing the importance of observing the 5 lay precepts and so on. This is so incredibly important. Then we have these quotes from Bodhisattva Shantideva's text, The Way of a Bodhisattva. In short, he's saying that it is very difficult, incredibly difficult, to obtain a precious human body, incredibly difficult to get the opportunity to practice the Dharma. So, there's nothing more valuable than the Dharma, so it's so important that now that we have this opportunity to practice the Dharma with the precious human body, that we really do it, especially while we are young and able, fit and able. And again, I want to encourage all of those here, Tibetans and Himalayans, and it seems there are several thousand people listening online, many of them probably from Tibet. This is my message to all of you, please have more children. Don't just have 1 or 2 children as is the modern way. Please have more children and devote some of them to the path of Dharma. Please encourage your children in the path of Dharma. Don't fall into the mistake of prioritizing worldly ways, prioritizing a Western modern education, trying to send your children off to America and Canada so they can become a doctor or an engineer or what. There's really nothing too special about that, and even if you do get over to America or Canada, it's not guaranteed that all your financial troubles will be dispelled. There are still plenty of homeless people in America and Canada. There are still plenty of people struggling. Material comfort is not guaranteed just by getting yourself over to the West. So instead, please have more children and encourage them in the path of Dharma. encourage them in the path of Dharma, and that includes encouraging some of them to become monks and nuns, so that we can maintain the monastic Sangha, which is the foundation of the Buddha's teachings. So in short, it's through the Dharma, by using this precious human body for the Buddha Dharma, that our life becomes meaningful and valuable. All of these mundane preoccupations, chasing after wealth and status and so on, and to that end, kind of modern education and this and that accomplishment, it just never leads to anything meaningless, and things never really work out. I think Rinpoche is saying, often you have a bright child, but from a poor family, so they're not able to give their child a good education. Then you might have a very wealthy family, but the children aren't that smart or capable, so they don't make use of their expensive education, and so on and so forth. Even if someone does become an engineer, a doctor, or this or that, these kind of secular professions that these days a lot of you probably think are really great accomplishments, does it really turn out to be beneficial, worthwhile, fulfilling? It doesn't. Just like Jess and Milarepa said, when you have a house, you don't have an owner. When you have an owner, you don't have a house. Mundane, all of these samsaric concerns, they never lead to real fulfillment. Think of King Songtsen Gampo, our great Dharma king of Tibet, one of the founding Dharma kings of Tibet. Who did he pay obeisance to? Who did he bow down to? Who did he regard as the most precious, priceless members of society? It was not engineers and doctors. It was not politicians and powerful people. It was the monastics and ngakpas, monastics and tantric practitioners. It was these two groups of people in front of him. He laid down his long locks of hair and had them walk over his hair as a sign of respect. So please keep these points in mind. Now we'll turn back to the text itself, page 63. So these points about a precious human life are taught in a lot of detail by Bodhisattva Shantideva in his text, and we have two of those verses quoted here. So I won't go through these verses by Shantideva and explain them word by word. Even though we could do that, that would be good, but we don't have time. Time is of the essence here. We have a set schedule, right? We need to get through the entire text by the end of the month because everyone is so busy with all of their mostly mundane preoccupations, visas and business plans and work and this and that. So we have to keep to the schedule. So now we come to the second subsection, the reflection on the difficulty of finding the freedoms and advantages in terms of a simile. So we find this simile in Nagarjuna's teachings and also the way of the Bodhisattva. This example of a turtle in the sea happening to poke his head through a yoke, meaning a wooden ring basically, that is adrift on the mighty sea. I won't explain this example in detail. That would take a lot of time. So on page 64, then we have the scriptural source for these, the flower chapter of one of Buddha's teachings. So if it's hard to obtain just a human body, what is there to say about enjoying the freedoms and advantages and the sublime Dharma? As we read in the way of the Bodhisattva, the appearance of the Buddhas in the world, all these are rare. When will they come to me again? And in the sutra requested by Ratnachuda, to see a guide is very hard indeed. To hear him speak the Dharma is also very hard. To be reborn a human is very difficult. To keep on finding discipline and faith is very hard as well. Now the third reflection, the difficulty of finding the freedoms and advantages in numerical terms among the different classes or types of beings. Beings in the three lower realms of hell, hungry ghosts and animals are extremely numerous, indeed as infinite in number as the dust particles on the earth. Literally beyond count, right? In contrast, the beings in the higher realms are very few and are said to be only as many as the dust particles on a fingernail. Of the beings in the three lower realms, the least numerous are the animals, and yet there's an inconceivable number of them that live in the depths, meaning in the ground and in the great oceans, while those that live scattered at different places, meaning on earth, fill everything, the ground, mountains, valleys, and the air. In comparison, human beings to be a god or human is practically impossible. Gods and humans are so few in number in comparison to animals. Just think of insects. Like if you go somewhere like Orissa in South India, you dig into the ground and you find that it's just full, writhing full with insects. The number of these insects, we're just thinking about insects, not other types of animals like fish and so on, is just beyond count. It's difficult to conceive of how many of them there are. Likewise, insects in Australia and so on. So in comparison, the number of human beings there are is extremely few. Monks look at beings in the lower realms to subsequently attain the human state is extremely difficult. So even if there are many who obtain a human body, rare are those who engage in the Dharma. Even rarer are those who encounter the unmistaken path to liberation. So, just as it says here, there are so few who obtain a human body, so few humans. To go back to the Tibetan and Himalayans situation, people are having fewer children these days, so fewer children are being born. And from among those children, there'll be even fewer who engage in the Dharma. These days, in the past, parents would encourage their children to become monks and nuns. There was quite a big portion of Tibetans and Himalayan Tibetans who would become monks or nuns. These days, that number has dropped dramatically. Hardly any of these Tibetan children are becoming monks and nuns. It's almost become a threat. You know, the parents prefer, and children prefer, to become a soldier, to enter the army. They think that's better than becoming a monk or nun. How perverse and backward is that? It's like you hear these anecdotes of you even hear of parents saying to their child, you know, if you don't do your studies well, if you don't behave well, I'm going to send you to the monastery. They think becoming a monk is such a lowly thing that they use it as a threat to their children, completely back to front. This is how it is in a lot of areas in Tibet. It seems in the Himalayan border regions, though, it's much better. Things are still pretty good. People have a lot of faith in the Dharma, and a lot of children are getting ordained. People have a really sincere faith in the Dharma still, and a lot of reverence for monks and nuns and the monastic life. And that's how it should be. And to backtrack, I think Rinpoche was saying, as for myself, I can thank my parents' kindness for guiding me onto the path of Dharma. And so the parents should show this kindness to their children, right? If you value the Dharma, then you should pass that on to your children and encourage them in the Dharma, right? If on the other hand you just value business, then that's how you raise your children, right? But if you value the Dharma, then you should raise them in the Dharma, encourage them in the Dharma. So in the past, So in the past, Khenpo Rinpoche, my teacher Khenpo Rinpoche had about 100 monks or so in his monastery. And some of the monks were really excellent, some of them were not, not all of the same caliber. Anyway, one time a father came along with his young child. It seems this child was really unruly and just untamable. And he went to Khenpo Rinpoche and said, please, Khenpo Rinpoche, I offer my child to you. Please accept him as a monk in your monastery. And Khenpo Rinpoche first of all said, okay, I accept. And then the father continued speaking and said, thank you so much, because this child is just completely out of control. We just can't control him. We just can't deal with him. And then Khenpo Rinpoche said, you what? And he was very displeased then. He said, what do you think you're doing, offering this unruly, terrible child to the monastery, to the Sangha of Buddha's followers? How do you if you can't control him, if he's that unruly, how do you think he'll contribute to the Buddha's teachings? He'll probably be an obstacle and actually damage the Buddha's teachings, damage our community here. So he didn't accept this child. I think Rinpoche said in the end he didn't accept the child. The poor father, he was at his wit's end, obviously, and he just didn't speak in quite the right way to Khenpo Rinpoche about his son. So anyway, the point of this anecdote is to say that the Buddhist Sangha and the monastic Sangha is a very special community, a very special, privileged, important place. So it is the creme de la creme, so to speak, the best of our children that should be that should enter that community and be part of the monastic Sangha that upholds Buddha's teachings. That's the point. Just as on a dark night, black with clouds, the sudden lightning glares and is all clearly shown, and all is clearly shown, likewise rarely, through the Buddha's power, virtuous thoughts rise, brief and transient, in the world. Such a beautiful verse from the way of the Bodhisattva. As explained in Khenpo Kumba's commentary, The Nectar of Manjushu's speech. Imagine a dark night, completely shrouded by darkness. You cannot see anything, no stars, no moonlight, and you have to walk. You have to go out and walk somewhere in the thickness of the night, thick darkness of the night. If suddenly there's a flash of lightning and it lights up the entire landscape so that you can see your path, see where you're going, see if there's an abyss or what have you in front of you, how much does that help you, right? It helps you orientate yourself and see where you need to go and how you can keep safe. So this example of bodhicitta being like a sudden flash of lightning in the dark of the night is explained really beautifully in this way, further explained really beautifully in this way by Khenpo Kumba Kunzang Palden in his commentary, The Nectar of Manjushu's speech. That you have at present found a human body like this has happened through the force of previous merit. And again, speaking to all of the parents here, if you have a few children and you send them all off to become engineers and doctors and so on, well, they are not going to be qualified or able to help you at the time of death. On the other hand, if some of your children become monastics and practitioners, well then, when you get sick and when you arrive at the time of death, they'll be able to pray for you, they'll be able to practice for you and lead you to the pure realms. Your children who are engineers and doctors, they will not be able to help you whatsoever, and you'll be headed then to the lower realms. Even if one of your children becomes a monk and then they disrobe, there's still enormous benefit there. They'll know how to practice, they'll know how to pray, they'll know how to help you and others at the time of death. They will have stayed on retreat, and so on and so forth. So please think about how you raise your children and what path you set them upon. Now the third reflection, reflecting on the importance of finding the freedoms and advantages. This is discussed by means of the following three reflections, reflecting on how they constitute the support for accomplishing benefit and happiness, reflecting on the superhuman qualities one will obtain, and reflecting on how much one stands to gain or lose. So, what benefits are there? What excellent qualities are there to this precious body of freedoms and advantages? Well, as it says, by virtue of obtaining this precious human body, we attain the happiness and comfort of higher rebirth in the God and human realms. But moreover, in addition, one can also accomplish the nirvana of the lower vehicles and unsurpassable enlightenment as well. Without obtaining a human body, there's no way one can achieve any kind of happiness in cyclic existence, let alone accomplish liberation. But by starting from the most insignificant positive actions and devoting one's efforts exclusively to the sublime Dharma, one obtains the manifold perfect qualities of higher rebirth, namely as a human being, and ultimate excellence meaning the state of liberation and enlightenment, as it says in Nagarjuna's jewel garland, if you constantly practice the Dharma and so on. So Rinpoche reading through these quotations. So this quotation ends with, bit by bit, you will accomplish Buddhahood. In short, what is being taught here is that those who do not practice the Dharma are always miserable and in a difficult circumstances. Those who practice the Dharma are happy in this life and happy in the next. Their present situation is good and their future destination is also good. That is the quality of practicing the Dharma with a precious human body. So this should be the result of practicing the Dharma even in this life. So the Dharma should help us to live happily and at ease, regardless of what our circumstances are. As one of the great masters said, when you take just 1 point of Dharma to heart, as a result, you'll be constantly at ease. And all thoughts, I think then the quotation continues, all thoughts will become wisdom. The point is that if you take any teaching of Dharma to heart and really put it into practice, that will bring you benefit of being at ease, being fulfilled, being free of stress. On the other hand, if you don't take the Dharma to heart, then you'll constantly be beset by strife, by stress, by angst, family problems, mental stress, anxiety, physical hardship. No matter how much you obtain, how much you earn, no matter how sort of good things might get, you just won't be content, you won't be satisfied, and when you encounter difficulties, you won't be able to deal with them. On the other hand, as a practitioner, if you take the Dhamma to heart, then no matter how good things are, even if you have very simple living circumstances, you'll be completely happy, at ease, fulfilled, untroubled by problems you might encounter. One time, let's look at the example of late Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, when he was building Shechen Monastery. I went in to see him one day, and I was lucky, there was hardly anyone in his room with him. And he was just sitting there, completely at ease, with his bare chest, completely at ease. He was like the embodiment of non-thought. The embodiment of non-thought. Just seeing him sitting there like that had the effect of bringing oneself into a kind of state of non-thought or state of complete mental ease. That is how a practitioner should be. Anyone else, if they were overseeing that kind of enormous, difficult project, establishing a monastery like Shechen, and building it from scratch like that, they would be beset by stress and anxiety and worry. But he was just sitting there in complete and utter ease. So that is how we should be as practitioners. As Khenpo Chökyi Rinpoche would say to us, as a practitioner, you need to be happy. You need to be at ease. You need to be okay with whatever happens, whether things go well or not. The sign of a practitioner is just to be okay with it, to be content. Not to be like a worldly person who's so up and down, right? So affected and triggered by circumstances. Practitioners should not be like that. We need to turn our attention inwards, to turn our minds inwards and rest at ease. That's how a practitioner should be. So a practitioner should be happy. Practitioner must be happy. So I'm pretty happy. Sometimes, though, I feel unhappy because I look at myself and I think, oh, I'm not doing well, I'm not a genuine practitioner, I have this and that unfolds. And I feel a bit depressed with myself, discouraged. But then I look in and I apply myself and I keep going. So I don't mean we should just be like happy, constantly in high spirits, but happy in the sense of constantly at ease and content. Not falling prey to depression and anxiety and so on. So please take these points to heart. This is one of the oral instructions of Khenpo Chökyi Rinpoche. To be happy in the sense of content and at ease. No matter what happens, no matter what circumstances you find yourself in. If, on the other hand, if as a practitioner, if one is supposedly a practitioner, engages in practice and so on, but struggles with depression and anxiety and mental angst and so on, that's a sign, actually a very clear sign that one hasn't taken the Dhamma to heart, one hasn't merged the Dhamma with one's own mind. So please keep these points in your mind. Now the second reflection on the superhuman qualities one will obtain. When the Buddha Shakyamuni attained the great enlightenment, the support he had was as the Lord of mankind in our world of Jambudvipa, a body with the freedoms and advantages. It was therefore called better than the gods. So this human body endowed with the freedoms and advantages is a body, a support better than that of the gods, because it can lead to enlightenment. Because with this support we can practice the Dhamma and we can accomplish enlightenment. Buddha did not attain enlightenment in the realms of the gods because gods are proud of their abode and therefore they do not clearly realize the truth. There's a story from the Prajnaparamita scriptures that illustrates this point about how because of the pride and conceit that gods have, one cannot make progress on the path. It's a very nice story from the Prajnaparamita scriptures that illustrates this point. Having seen that only the human state has the perfect qualities of the freedoms and advantages, then Buddha, choosing an excellent family to be reborn in, choosing his mother and father, he departed the god realms for Kapilavastu, the kingdom of his parents in the human realm. And if, as one gains mastery of another special feature of the human body, this human physical body, is that it is a body endowed with the 6 elements. The 6 elements of the physical elements together with consciousness. This support is especially valuable and has a special potential when practicing the Vajrayana path. It gives us the ability to train in the subtle channels, winds and essences. By training in those, we can transmute out the basic constituents of our being and manifest enlightenment. It's only the physical human body that gives us this opportunity. Rebirth in the God realms does not give us that same opportunity. And indeed, in one of the Truma supplications by Jujun Rinpoche mentions just this, the value of a human body endowed with the 6 elements. So now reflecting on how much one stands to gain or lose through this precious human body endowed with freedoms and advantages, one can cross the ocean of suffering that is cyclic existence. So there is enormous profit to be gained from this precious human rebirth. So we should all be racing to attain this precious human rebirth because of the potential profit to be gained from it. Rinpoche used the English word racing. Yes, everyone should be lined up, kind of racing for this opportunity. As it says, if one's extremely clever and expert in the means for extracting its essence, this hard-won gain of the precious human body will be of immense benefit, far more than when a pauper finds a wish-fulfilling jewel. So again, I'm kind of racing through this part of the text because I do need to get through a certain number of pages each day so that we can finish the text and the teaching within the allocated number of days. It'll be difficult otherwise, difficult for those of you who have other things planned, difficult also to cover the cost of tent hire and all of that. So we have this constraint, this practical constraint here with the teaching. It seems there is often one is given this constraint when teaching, please teach this text in this many hours, please teach this text in this manner of days. Like when I was in the US last year, we taught one day that was always the case, there was a time constraint, or there was always a tight time constraint. Likewise with also teaching in the Himalayas, sometimes I'm invited to a place, Rinpoche mentioned a few specific places, for like 3 days, and I'm asked, please teach, say, the 37 practices of Bodhisattva in 2 days or 3 days. Such a tight time frame. Very difficult to get through texts and teachings in those tight time frames. Rinpoche mentioned also the Rubens Museum, where Rinpoche was told, you have 45 minutes to teach, spend 2 minutes on this, 3 minutes on that, 10 minutes on this. It was a bit excessive. Anyway, continuing with this third reflection on how much one stands to gain or lose. So on page 68, what a joy it is that I've now obtained a precious human body, that I'm following a sublime teacher and practicing the profound instructions. I must do my best to make full use of it. So it says, make full use of it, make full use of having obtained this human body endowed with the freedoms and advantages. This body becomes precious and valuable when we make full use of it in this way, by following a teacher and practicing the teachings. Otherwise, if we just fritter away that's not the right word, but if we just let our time pass through our hands, preoccupied with business and money making and so on, then nothing valuable will come of this precious human life. We will not fulfill its potential. Now, reflecting on the need to make full use of the freedoms and advantages, first of all, reflecting on the need to be diligent in the Dharma by all means. Rinpoche is reading through this passage. The Way of the Bodhisattva says, thus, having found this moment of reprieve by obtaining this precious human body, if I now fail to train myself in virtue, now that I have the opportunity, what greater folly could there ever be? If I waste this precious opportunity, how more could I betray myself? How more could I deceive myself? So now we dedicate the merit and stop here for today.